George's Secret Key to the Universe, Chapter 12, page 106. When George opened his eyes again, he saw a massive, pale yellow planet with a belt of rings in the dark sky ahead of them. They sped along the comet, heading for a point just above the rings. From far away, the rings looked like soft ribbons. Some were pale yellow, like the planet itself. Others were darker. "This is Saturn," said Annie, "and I saw it first." "I know what it is," replied George. "And what do you mean, first? I'm in front of you. I saw it first." "No, you weren't looking. You were too scared. You had your eyes shut." Annie's voice rang inside his helmet. "Ner, ner, na, na, ner." "No, I didn't," protested George. "Shh," Annie interrupted him. "Did you know that Saturn is the second biggest of the planets that move around the sun?" "Of course I knew," lied George. "Oh, really?" replied Annie. "Then if you knew that, you'll know which is the biggest planet of all." "Well, said George, who had no idea. "It's the Earth, isn't it?" "Wrong," trumpeted Annie. "The Earth is teeny weeny, just like your silly little brain. The Earth is only number 5. "How do you know that?" "How do I know you've got a silly little brain?" said Annie sarcastically. "No, stupid," said George furiously. "How do you know about the planets?" "Because I've done this trip many, many times before," said Annie, tossing her head as though throwing back her ponytail. "So, let me tell you, and listen carefully," she ordered. "There are 8 planets orbiting the sun. 4 are huge and 4 are small. The huge ones are Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. But the 2 biggest are so much bigger than the others that they are called the giants. Saturn is the second of the giant planets, and the biggest one of all is Jupiter. The 4 small planets are Mars, Earth, Venus, and Mercury," she continued, ticking them off on her fingers. "The Earth is the biggest of the small ones, but if you put these 4 together into a ball, you still wouldn't get anything nearly as big as Saturn. Saturn is more than 45 times bigger than those 4 small planets added together." Annie was clearly delighted to be showing off about the planets. Even though he was very annoyed by how smug she was, George was secretly impressed. All he had ever done was dig potatoes and mess around with a pig in his backyard. It wasn't much in comparison with riding around the solar system on a comet. As Annie talked, the comet flew nearer and nearer to Saturn. They got so close that George could see the rings were made not of ribbons but of ice, rocks, and stones. These were all different sizes, and the smallest no bigger than a speck of dust, the largest about 12 feet long. Most of them were moving much too fast for George to catch one. But then he spotted a small chunk of rock calmly floating right next to him. A quick glance behind showed that Annie wasn't looking. He reached out, snatched the rock, and held it in a space glove. A real treasure from outer space. His heart was beating fast. Then the sound was so loud in his ears that he thought Annie must be able to hear it through the sound transmitter in his helmet. He suspected that taking things home from outer space was probably not allowed, so he hoped she hadn't noticed. "George, are you all right?" asked Annie. "Why are you wriggling around like that?" George quickly thought of something to say to divert her attention from the rock he was trying to stuff in his pocket. We're going to skip these 2 pages and come back to them. We're back on page 112. "Why did we change direction? Why did our comet move towards Saturn? Why didn't we continue in a straight line? He babbled. Oh dear, you just don't know anything at all, do you? Sighed Annie. It's lucky for you that I'm such a fount of useful scientific knowledge, she added importantly. We moved towards Saturn because we fell toward it, just like an apple falls on Earth. Just like we fall onto the comet. When we arrived, just like the particles in space, clouds fall onto each other and become balls that become stars. Everything falls toward everything throughout the universe. And do you know the name of what causes this fall? George didn't have a clue. It's called gravity. So it's because of gravity that we're going to fall on Saturn now and crash? No, silly. We're moving way too fast to crash. We're just flying by to say hello. Annie waved to Saturn and shouted, "Hello, Saturn!" so loudly that George's hands automatically tried to cover his ears, but he couldn't because of his helmet. So instead, he yelled back, "Don't shout!" "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to." As they whizzed past Saturn, George saw that Annie was right. The comet didn't fall all the way onto the giant planet, but cruised straight past it. With some distance now, he could see that Saturn not only had rings, but also had a moon, just like Earth. Looking closer, he could hardly believe his eyes. He saw another moon and another and yet another. In total, he saw 5 large moons and even more small ones before Saturn was too far away for him to keep counting. Saturn has at least 5 moons, he thought. George hadn't known that a planet other than Earth could have even 1 moon, let alone 5. He looked at Saturn with respect as a giant planet with rings shrank into the distance behind them until it was just a big bright dot in the starry background. So now we're going to take a look back at the informational pages throughout the chapter. It will be on page 110. And this is information about the solar system. So you could see everything in the picture on the bottom. You have the Sun, Mercury, and then Venus, Earth, Mars. This is Ceres, a dwarf planet, which means it's extremely small. And then you move into the giants. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. And then you see Pluto, this little tiny guy, Eris, another dwarf planet. And then these other ones are too distant, not too small. Now, they're not moons or they're not stars, they're planets. When they're called dwarf planets, they are even smaller than Earth, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. They're just little tiny guys. They're called dwarfs. So, the solar system. The solar system is the cosmic family of our sun. It comprises all the objects trapped by the sun's gravity. Planets, dwarf planets, moons, comets, asteroids, and other small objects yet to be discovered. An object trapped by the sun's gravity is said to be in orbit around the sun. And so that's why you have lines going out in the bottom picture. That's how they orbit around the sun. So the closer planets move quicker, and the farther planets move a little slower. The closest planet to the sun is Mercury. And Mercury is 36 million miles away from the sun. Farthest planet away from the sun is Neptune. Neptune is 2.8 billion miles away from the sun on average. The distance of Earth from the sun is 93 million miles on average. And then the number of planets, we have 8 total. And from the closest sun, the planets are Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And number of dwarf planets, 3. From the closest to the farthest of the sun, the dwarf planets are Ceres, Pluto, and Eris. Number of known planetary moons, 165. So for each planet, out of all of them together, they have 165 moons. On Earth, we can only see one, which is the sun and the moon. Those go along with Earth. Some number known comets is 1,000. The estimated real number is way bigger than that. The farthest distance traveled by man-made object, more than 9.3 million miles, 9,300,000,000 miles, is the distance reached by Voyager 1 on August 15, 2006 at 10:13 a.m. So, this corresponds exactly 100 miles, the distance from the Earth to the Voyager 1 is still traveling away. So now we're going to skip over 112 and 113 and look at page 114. And here's some information about Saturn. Saturn is the sixth closest planet to the Sun. The average distance to the Sun is 888 million miles. The diameter at the equator, which is the length around the planet, at the middle of it, is 74,898 miles. And then the surface area is 83.7 times Earth's surface area. Volume, 763.59 times Earth volume. The mass is 95 times Earth's mass. And gravity at the equator is 91.4%. So these equations tell you how much bigger, because of the multiplication, Saturn is than planet Earth. It takes Saturn 29.46 Earth years to circle around the Sun. So it is made up of hot, rocky core that is surrounded by a liquid metal layer that is surrounded by a liquid hydrogen and helium layer. There then is an atmosphere that surrounds it all. So helium and hydrogen are chemicals of science that you'll learn about later. Winds have been recorded at speeds up to 1,116 miles per hour in Saturn's atmosphere. So far, Saturn has 59 confirmed moons. 7 of them are round. Titan is the largest, is the only known moon within the solar system to have an atmosphere and volume. Titan is more than 3 times bigger than our moon.